Yeah. Using the sun and stuff, and yeah. I don't. Let's see. And then moving is a big thing. What do you well, I work for you. Oh, you are. I didn't mean. My heart can be an hour and a half. Depending is. 2 hours depending on how it is.
All right, everyone.
Oh, okay. I just using so I know
So well, thank you so much for staying today. For everyone online, it's an absolute honor and joy to have Dr. Jacqueline Cooper with us here today. She is an ND and a graduate of the Naturopathic Medicine College in 2012. She also holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Queen's University in Kingston. And Dr. Jacqueline Cooper is the Director of Field Training and Education for Atrium Innovations. And we are so honored to have her here today.
And here today, we also have Rebecca Dalal, which Rebecca is also a CNP grad of IHN, and she works with Atrium and Dr. Jacqueline on their educational team, developing a lot of the workshops and events that they do. And she's been working really hard with us to set up the first ever Atrium co-op, which is here with IHN. So we're all very excited about that. And Rebecca also has her own practice as well, called Reform and Reform and Heal, where she focuses on menstrual health and histamine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and welcome Rebecca. Oh, and anybody that is attending here in person, so those that are attending virtually, you can't see, but there's a number of people sitting behind the camera. So everyone that is here in person is receiving a Atrium gift package, which has got a bunch of supplement goodies inside. So thank you to Atrium for those.
Samples are always fun. Nothing like being able to try things out. So welcome everybody. Thank you for being here today. I'm super excited to talk to you about this topic. You guys see that okay? Do we want to go like top? Maybe. Yeah.
So much better.
Yeah, perfect. So this is a really exciting topic. If you guys have not grabbed one of these brochures already, grab them. I think, for those of you who are online, we'll be sending this out with the recording and the resources and electronic copy. A lot of what I'm going to talk to you today, especially when we get into the imbalance of the immune system, is rooted in the work of Dr. Sam Yannick, who's an immunologist down in the US and is just frankly brilliant and has totally reframed how I think about the immune system. And definitely when it comes to allergies, that's why we're talking about this idea, the idea of the unbalanced immune system really being at the root. And we're going to talk about how stress comes into play as well. Okay, so a little bit of an overview of what we're going to talk about. We're going to start off talking about just really understanding allergies and what's immunologically going on or wrong, per se. And then we'll get into the difference between suppression and support. And finally, we'll talk about the stress and gut involvement. And we're going to end with a fun case study of a little bit of a different kind of case of allergies, so to speak. So first and foremost, it's a hypersensitivity reaction. And one of the things that I want you guys to kind of forever going forward, when you think about seasonal allergies, to be thinking that, oh, that is an interesting hallmark of what can be a very common Th2 dominance. And so we're going to talk about the Th1 and Th2 balance. It's very much like a seesaw in our body. when one is up, the other is down. They should go up and down with circadian rhythm. And so we're going to talk about this because a lot of the Th1, Th2 balance is the fundamental crux of what kind of drives the other immune system. And this is a great resource because a lot of this, it can be new and complicated. And so there's some great kind of resources within here that really reinforce some of those topics I'm talking about today. But we think about some of the things that go along with allergies. I'll come back to that in a second, that last diagram. But we often talk about the triad, right, of allergies, eczema, and asthma. And part of what we'll see as we go through is that, all of these are a cluster typically associated with that imbalance of the immune system and Th2 dominant. And so, we know that they often correlate, but part of what we'll see going on is that they have the same fundamental imbalance at the root cause driving all of them. And it's not just these three conditions, there's actually a whole host of conditions. So sometimes when you have, we were just talking with Elizabeth before we came in here, a really complex case come in, which I would say we were just discussing, there is this theme, this trend of increasing complexity in the presentation of the individuals who are coming in and seeking help, meaning that it's not just typically, you might get a straight IBS case where it's like, okay, we can throw a probiotic at it, some elimination diet, and boom, they're feeling great. But more and more we're seeing it's IBS, it's, histamine intolerance, there's migraines, there's skin dysregulation, it's all of these things layered on. And it can be very overwhelming as a practitioner to know where to start with a case like that. And part of when we understand the fundamental elements of the immune system, particularly this Th1, Th2 imbalance and some of the ripple domino effects that come of it, some of those really complex cases start to be a lot less overwhelming because you go, these are not 5 different intense things. These are a cluster under the umbrella of a particular imbalance. And, if we can just, get that seesaw ebbing and flowing back, in rhythm, we're going to see a lot of those seemingly disparate things kind of come back online together. So allergies, eczema, and asthma, all typically as a result of that Th2 dominance. And by the way, as a society, we're a little bit more predisposed to being Th2 dominant because of our lifestyle. We are heavy meat consumers. We are heavily afflicted with stress. We have a lot of exposure to pesticides and other chemicals, and all of those things kind of slant the scale and lead us to be a little bit more predisposed here. So this is really the crux when we talk about the imbalance of the immune system that drives allergies. And so when we come back to allergies, fundamentally what we tend to think of historically is this process, right? That we have some kind of an allergen. Maybe this is pollen. It's a hypersensitivity reaction. So it's something that we should not be responding to as a threat, but our immune system has had a kind of a misidentification and it's responding to pollen, grass, dust as if it's a threat and pathogen. And this is the process that we typically are aware of. I can move that tool down. So there's the presentation and then the forming of IgE antibodies. So we can form a lot of different types of antibodies. Something that I did a lot in my practice, because I did a lot with skin, was I would screen for IgA and IgG antibodies, right? These are more, we talk about food sensitivities, but when we think about an allergy, whether it's seasonal or like a food allergy like peanut, we're talking about that IgE antibody. And so when that IgE antibody forms in the mast cells, then encounter that antigen again, there's that degranulation. So this is a classic allergic response. Something that's really important to know, though, we'll talk about as we go through, is that this is not the only way that we get high levels of histamine. When we have, from a big picture perspective, this is again that Th1, Th2 piece, when this is out of whack, we can see that also lead to high levels of histamine because chronic inflammation in the body, it can in and of itself cause mast cell degranulation and the dumping of histamine. And so when we want to start looking at some of these complex cases, this is the core play. There's a lot of things that are going on here. But when we look at, the TH1, TH2 balance, when this goes off here, you talk about the asthma, allergies, sinusitis, and really also bladder infections. And the theme here is hollow spaces. So TH2 activity is not inherently bad. It's not bad at all. It's actually, very protective, but it's what's dominating in the hollow spaces. So that's, again, the cavities, the sinuses. It's also obviously upper respiratory tract infections. So think about all of the hollow spaces, the GI, bladder, all kind of connected with that TH2, and also then the skin, right? Almost like everything that's interfacing with the world, both kind of on the outside and the inside. TH1, that's what helps us fight viruses, right? That's more about fighting off the intercellular. When something, a pathogen, a threat gets deep, it gets beyond the skin or beyond the gut mucosal membranes. That's when we really rely on our TH1 activity. So both of these are really important, but when we see that increase in that slanting, maybe because it's our cortisol, because as we'll come to talk about, cortisol actually drives TH2, that circadian rhythm. Melatonin drives TH1, cortisol drives TH2. So we should, if we have happy circadian rhythm and we're living in balance and flux, what we see at nighttime is this surge of melatonin that not only helps us fall asleep, but also kicks that TH1 virus fighting, also cancer, right? That's the other piece when we think of immune surveillance. So if we think about what TH1 does, it helps us fight infections, but it's very much linked to our innate immune response. And so those two are locked together. And so both of those pieces are really important from a standpoint of surveilling for abnormal cells and things like that. So there's another piece that we want to, it's very important. We want both sides of the coin. But again, we want TH2 as well. And so we want, when our morning cortisol spike occurs, we want to see that surge in TH2 in an imbalance, because we can also have TH1 dominance, right? So something like rheumatoid arthritis is typically often a manifestation of TH1 imbalance. So it can go both ways. So there's no good or bad. And I think that's really important. It's just all about balance. And you can see over here in the upper left-hand corner, we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into that, the dysbiosis, inflammation, stress picture, and how that all comes into play. But really, I would say the core thing to be thinking about, and this is really important in all of your, prescriptions when you're looking at helping people with their diet and, how they're modifying their diet, what's their supplement regimen. I think anything that you can add that helps them ground themselves in healthy circadian rhythm and looking for, what be doing or what parts of their daily life are getting them out of circadian rhythm. It's a great thing to call attention to because it can be a real, kind of sticking point or obstacle to creating that balance in your life. And a lot of times, back to the idea of food sensitivities, the reason, if we think about, elimination diets, which are so powerful, we were talking about it before, I know it was a big part of my healing journey that got me into, naturopathic medicine. Was like, oh my God, I suffered with skin stuff my whole life, eczema, acne, and then it's like, I did a food panel, just eradicated my food sensitivities and it's a whole different realm. Now, if we get even deeper beyond that of like, why do we develop food sensitivities? This immune imbalance is a big core. So it's not just the allergies, it's also the food sensitivities. So the more and more we can get deep rooted to the causative elements, so important. And of course, I think that we live in a society of screens. So screen activity is huge. It can be a huge element that disrupts our melatonin, but we also, thankfully, with technology, we've got night shift mechanisms. We've got, blocking, like UV blocking, not UV, blue light blocking glasses. There's lots of ways that we can function, right? I don't know what time your guys' classes, do you have evening classes?
6 to 9:30.
Yeah, 6 to 9:30, right? Like we have to be a part of our society, functionally, we have to be, I know we're on evening webinars. There's a lot of things that, just inevitably will throw us off, but there's a lot of kind of mitigating mechanisms that we can do to balance. And so balancing this seesaw is really, really a core key piece. So we look at, what are the typical, getting into seasonal allergies, what are the typical go-tos? So for people, before they walk into your guys' office or practices, and encounter you, most people are going to the drugstore and they're getting an antihistamine, right? They're getting a Reactin, a Claritin, something of the nature. Typically, when they're taking that, they work very well from a perspective that it alleviates the symptoms. It typically is blocking histamine at the receptor site. So it's competing with histamine. And that's part of why then you don't feel the symptoms of having high histamine, because it's actually blocking the receptors. However, it's not preventing the release of histamine, right? So we still have those high levels of histamine floating in the body, and that's problematic for a number of reasons. Never mind some of the side effects that might occur, but it's not getting to root cause. So it really is suppression of the symptoms versus corrective. And I always loved this analogy that I heard from a professor when I was in school, where he talked about our symptoms are really like the dashboard of a car, right? Showing us it's like the gas light coming on, the engine light coming on. And we would never, if we were driving and saw our gas light come on, we wouldn't go like, oh, well, that's ridiculous. Let's just put a little duct tape and ignore that, right? Because where would that get us, right? Same thing with maybe an engine light. Engine light, you might feel like, oh, let's see how long I can cruise on this before something happens. But then we can have major fallout, where something that if we addressed it, the oil, right, an oil change, if we address the maintenance, then we end up preventing major issues and major mechanic bills down the road. We're running out of gas, like, you get the drift, but we do it all the time with our bodies. And I don't know about you guys, but as much as I know, I can still be guilty, right, of like pushing through and, thinking like, oh, okay, yeah. And I did. Rebecca knows my story. If any of you guys come on our evening webinars, we do webinars every Tuesday, Thursday. I shared my journey where I was practically wig shopping last year before I realized I was like, oh, I'm good. No stress, I'm good. Everything's good. All good. Oh, my hair's falling out. That's funny. Oh, wow. And so we can sometimes know all the things, but, still live in a little bit of denial. And so I think this is really important, especially when we get into this, conversation with patients and clients where you say like, hey, why might you not want to take an allergy supplement? And I'm not saying never. My husband gets mad at me. I had a little bout of it earlier this year. He's like, just take a Reactin. I'm like, but then I don't know if my remedies are working, right? Because it's like, if you want to know and you want that feedback, and I think this is just a good thing to instill in clients, is that our symptoms are our body talking to us. And we just aren't typically trained to understand the language, but if we can appreciate that the symptoms are the communication, the more savvy we get with symptom, languaging, then we can respond to the nudging and whispers as opposed to waiting till the really emphatic, screaming and yelling. So now when we talk about mast cells, so mast cells really are at the core of the conversation when it comes to allergies, because this is what the mast cells are, what dump the histamine. And back to, there was this very old school way of thinking, and there's a much newer appreciation for the complexity of mast cells, and that they're not just involved with, allergies, they're involved in a whole host of things. And one of the things I would just emphasize is a really deep connectivity to the nervous system. And when we talk about something called neurogenic inflammation, it's like a whole other type of inflammation that I need to put slide out. I always put in too many slides that I can't cover. So, the neurogenic inflammation is the interaction between a neuron and a mast cell. And one of the things that can happen, so it's a unique type of inflammation, but it just shows in that interconnectivity, because you can have neurons that are sending signaling that cause mast cells to degranulate, but then the presence of histamine activates the neurons and they get into very much a loop. And this is we talk about immune imbalance. It's really the theme that you want to appreciate, is that, stress in our body leads to inflammation. Inflammation in our body opens the door to dysbiosis. Dysbiosis in the gut promotes more inflammation in the body. More inflammation in the body leads to more stress chemistry. So it really is this very cyclical piece. And when we want to be able to interrupt those elements. So we look at mast cells, And there is a ton of different implications, but one that I would really drive home is just thinking about that connectivity to the nervous system and inflammation, which we're going to talk about. So before we get there, and just to talk about what are our kind of core natural antihistamines, I think two of the key classics, vitamin C and quercetin. If we're looking at using vitamin C and quercetin, both of which are great for helping to stabilize those mast cells and make them less prone to degranulating and dumping histamine, the dosing that we want is up there on the slide. So for vitamin C, we want to get to at least 2 grams a day. And for quercetin, minimum dose we want to be at is at least 250 milligrams, but up to potentially 600 3 times a day. So that's your rough kind of dosing for what you want to get to. They also work very synergistically well together. Now, if I had to pick a vitamin C, it would be ester C all day long. And Sisu is now actually under the umbrella of Atrium. And this is a newer member to our brand family. And I'm so excited that we had them come into the fold because I've learned so much about the ester C that's in Sisu. So ester C is a proprietary form of vitamin C that is very, very unique. And I want you guys to think about whenever you see ester C, it is like a whole different, it's a whole different kettle of fish. It's actually, don't even think of it as like, oh, it's an absorbable vitamin C, it's a buffered vitamin C. It is all of those things, but it actually goes through a hot water process that starts to break it down. So what you're getting is more than just vitamin C, you're actually getting the metabolites of vitamin C. So there's 3 that are listed on the slide there, the dehydroascorbate, the threonate, and then that 4-hydroxymethylfuranone. There's actually a lot more. Those are just the 3 that are going to have been most notably detected when they do the research. And again, these are pre-digested in that vitamin C, once it gets into your body, would start to break down to some of these metabolites. Now, what's the benefit of giving the ester C in this form is that it is fast absorbing, as is most vitamin C. However, the key difference is the 24-hour retention. That is fundamentally really, really different. There is also the gentleness on the stomach that mostly comes from it being buffered and less acidic. But the amount of research, in particular, looking at how much it improves and boosts the level of vitamin C in your white blood cells. Again, we think about immune. This is where we can't, it's not just about absorption through the gut, but actually into the white blood cells and staying there. So if you see the green line is the placebo, the blue line is your regular ascorbic acid. And so when we see the ascorbic acid, they both absorb quite quickly. However, the ester C, the orange line, you can see from baseline at the beginning of, before they administered the supplement, they drew blood, spun it, assessed how much vitamin C was in the white blood cells. That became the baseline. After 2 hours, your ascorbic acid had increased it to about 15% more. And the ester C was already 25% more. So there was a significant difference in the amount of increase at 2 hours. But again, what's more impressive is then what happens after. So after about 2 hours, it starts to decrease the regular ascorbic acid. But for the ester C, it continues to climb. So it actually doesn't peak until 8 hours after administration, which at point it's 50% more than what was in a baseline. So this is really fundamentally different for when you're prescribing and recommending dosing and putting a protocol together, especially if we just flip for a second, taking a step away from allergies to looking at acute illness, right? So when I was in practice in a primary care setting up in Markham, and someone came in because we encouraged our patients, if you get sick, come in and see us, do a walk-in visit, do an acute, because how you handle the small things are going to determine a lot of trajectory on the bigger things. And so we would often, with an acute cold, flu, upper respiratory, a vitamin C dosing, peppered through the day, usually 2,000 milligrams, 3 times a day, maybe 4 times. Oftentimes we'd say go to bowel tolerance. That was standard because we know that it flushes out so quickly. You get that spike and it dumps out. So with the ester C, you can actually have a very fundamentally different approach. If we're talking about preventative, or if we're also talking about from a standpoint that acute dosing. And keep in mind, we think about fighting those infections, those viral pieces that we know vitamin C is so helpful for. That also helps with that seesaw, right? So we think about when we spike up the innate immune support and the Th1, because those go hand in hand, you know, with vitamin C, that's also another thing that's going to help to rebalance. Last thing I just want to talk about is cost, because one of the questions that gets asked all the time when we teach on ester state is, well, how does it compare to liposomal? Which is a great question because liposomal is hot, hot, hot. And one of the things that I would say is that liposomal, for me, in my personal professional opinion, is reserved for things that do not absorb well. So glutathione, 100%, we need liposomal glutathione. Unless you're getting an IV, and the absorbability of glutathione orally is very poor. So liposomal all day long. Vitamin C, the absorption rate we saw is very easy. It's very well absorbed. It's just not well retained. Now, I know some people have said, well, the liposomal helps it retain better. Okay. When I look at the research, I haven't seen any liposomal format that has research that has shown anything like this or close. And so my thing when I'm deciding on, you know, efficacy and what I'm using for and going to recommend in a protocol, it would always be about what's the benefit to cost ratio, right? So if I'm going to prescribe something that's quite expensive, I want to know that there's a tangible benefit for the individual. And so when we look at just from a cost perspective, I'm going to move that so you guys can see it. There's a really significant difference in cost for liposomal dose. So just from my personal perspective, it's not the value proposition for the individual that's taking it is not there for liposomal C. Not to say we want that liposomal delivery system for a lot of other things. Okay, so that's vitamin C. Coming back to quercetin. So we talked about quercetin helps to stabilize the mast cells, as does vitamin C. These are just some research here and some studies that you can look to. But I did want to highlight that last one where it does also regulate that Th1, Th2 stability. So again, this is another benefit. We think about our two kind of core antihistamine nutraceuticals. From a perspective in the professional lineup, we've got both in Douglas and Pure, some nice quercetin options. I will call out the Douglas one though, in that it does have the bromelain in there, which can be super helpful for people. However, you know, if anybody has bromelain sensitivities, then of course you'd want to minimize that and go with something like the straight up quercetin. All right, there we go. So some of the stuff over here, and I'm going to skip through these a little bit quickly, but I do just want to highlight and talk to them. When you look at those, there'll be a full write-up in here, but when we look at the Pure Response protocol, so Dr. Sam Yannick, one of the great tools that I love as clinicians and practitioners that we can utilize is this roadmap. So this is another version of the roadmap that I put up there, and it can just be a great way to anchor with the individuals that you're working with to be like, okay, use it as a roadmap of what's going on for them. Is there a huge dysbiosis case? Is there a huge stress case? What are the elements? But always kind of honing in and reminding yourself on that core Th1, Th2 piece. Where is there imbalance? And there's actually on his website, the Cogent's Immunology website, there's an awesome questionnaire that practitioners can utilize to have patients fill out, and there are 2 columns. So there's like, here's your Th1 column, here's your Th2 column, and they basically take their symptoms. And then as a practitioner, you tally it up. And that gives you a very quick, clear idea of how much of their case and how much of the symptoms they're experiencing are showing that they have a Th1 issue, meaning that they're not making enough Th1. Or from the second column, how much of their issue is that they have too much Th2 activity. So these are really complex concepts. And then you think like, how do I bring it into a visit? But that chart and questionnaire, it makes it very, very simple and streamlined. And so this particular supplement is designed to help boost up Th1. The Perilla Plus with NAC is designed to help rein in an inappropriate or excessive amounts of Th2. So those resources are there for you as practitioners to look at those charts. And then there is also guidance around, based on how high their score is, what you would maybe want to dose. So there's great resources again for like how to help manage those pieces. But as you know in here, the NNCL-15, like NAC has gotten tons of rave reviews over the last couple of years for lots and lots of reasons. But one of the key elements is it does help to produce glutathione, right? And even if we look back to the berberine, if we look in here, the broccoli sprout extract, why that's in there is again for helping with support of the sulforaphane and the production of glutathione. And so we think about our brassicas, these are one of the kind of rich foods that we want people consuming because it helps to support that system. And one of the deficiencies that we see with glutathione is it actually can inhibit this immune balance. So doing it through diet from a preventative perspective is really quite huge. But then also if we find someone's got a frank deficiency that we want to correct and get them back to maintenance, you can utilize the supplements as well. And of course could always incorporate the glutathione on top of that. Okay, so moving into stress, I'm just watching my time here. Moving into the stress piece. So this is going to anchor us into that other aspect of the chart. And so stress chemistry will always drive inflammation in the body. If the inflammation in the body is left unchecked and it goes on and it becomes chronic, it is going to open the door, as I mentioned, to both dysbiosis in the gut, but also inflammation in the brain. And so inflammation in the brain can take on a lot of different presentations. We can see it as anxiety, we can see it as depression, mood regulation, brain fog. We can also see it as fatigue, right? Issue concentrating. There's an epidemic of ADHD diagnosis happening right now. And I would argue that it's a lot more of a stress picture, because even part of what happens, there's a lot of ways and reasons that, when we're stressed, it becomes really hard to focus and concentrate. One being our dopamine shifts, right? So when our dopamine is here in our prefrontal cortex, it's very easy to focus. When we're stressed and it goes to the lateral aspects of our brain, it's not that we have a dopamine deficiency, it's just in different places for different purposes. And I kind of make it akin to, like, if you guys were writing an exam in here, your final exam, you're trying to really focus and harness all your knowledge. And I came in and dropped a box with a few different tarantulas floating around the room. How well would you focus? Not very, right? Because you'd be jumpy and your peripheral vision would be high. And did I see something move? Is it crawling up my leg? Did I just feel something? You're hypersensitive because you're trying to be hyper aware and hyper vigilant of the assumed danger, not assumed, in the room. Right. So that's where our mind goes when we're stressed, because keep in mind, we use the word stress a lot because we experience it a lot, but stress to our body and being means that it feels that its very survival is threatened. Right. And so that's a big deal. So when we have stress, we're doing this, where it's very hard to focus in and hone in. That can be part of it. But this inflammation piece, what we see is that an inflamed brain is not only going to, drive certain presentations, but part of it is it metabolically compromises the neurons in those brain cells. And so an inflamed brain all of a sudden stops being quite as high functioning. So the neurons themselves are not unhealthy, but they tend to start firing slower. And they're not dysfunctional in themselves. It's the environment, the inflamed environment. And so that's also a piece of the puzzle where you now have brain cells that are just a little bit kind of slower to get going and functioning. And we see that part of that inhibition of activity that we really want to be aware of is with the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve in particular, it drives our parasympathetic response. And so this is actually something we're seeing a lot more and more post-COVID, because the virus, SARS-CoV-2, it actually, we know that there was an affinity for the vagus nerve. And so some of the long haulers presentation that we're seeing actually is very rooted to some degree in this dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system and the lack of vagal tone. And so when we can do things to help reestablish that vagal tone, we can help bring back a whole host of symptoms, back into it. Because if you look at dysautonomia is the technical term, just for, dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system. But when you look at the symptoms that fall under that umbrella term, it's almost like every organ system you can imagine. It's dizziness, it's vertigo, it's fatigue, it's heart palpitations, it's exercise intolerance, it's changes in body temperature, blood pressure, heart rate, it's like on and on and on, because if you think about our nervous system, it touches everything, right? It's kind of like, you think of the nervous system, the gut, and our immune system, they're so core and infiltrated to every aspect of our body. So when we can get those three organ systems functioning well, we can really take care of a lot of it. It's like the tree analogy, right? It's like when you deal with the root system and trunk, like all of you see that you don't have to worry about all of the disparate leaves. So when we look at this piece, the vagal nerve activity is really huge. And part of it in parcel is because not only does it drive our parasympathetic, our rest and digest, it also very directly inhibits inflammation. And specifically, the cytokines, which are like our messengers, right? They're like little messengers in the body that tell our immune system how should it respond, right? It's like the signals that say like, okay, create this kind of a response or create this kind of a response. I mentioned IgE for allergies, IgG, IgA are more sensitivities. I always talking to patients, I would always describe it like it's your immune system's your body's personal, military, right? Think of it like Air Force, Army, Navy. There's all these different ways the immune system can respond. And so the cytokines, their job is to message and say, okay, we need some Navy to rush in over here, or we need some of this. And so when we look at the vagus nerve, it has a very direct inhibition of these two particular cytokines, IL-6 and TNF-alpha. Don't worry, you have to remember, so don't quiz after. But I will just, as a note of interest, IL-6 is one of the key cytokines that goes sky high with response to COVID and the COVID vaccines. So when we talk about the very different presentation that people could have, some people got headaches, some people got gut stuff, some people have body aches. The reason being IL-6 receptors are all over the body. So that's why you could have very distinct different elements and presentations and symptoms. And so when we look at the vagus nerve, it makes sense because we know the virus had an affinity for the vagal nerve, and then that inhibits IL-6. So there's an element right there. And so getting the vagus nerve back on track, whether it's just because of stress and inflammation or post-infection, and it's not, COVID is not, it's not new. We've seen a lot of post-infection, dysregulation with all kinds of different infections, not just the COVID-19 virus, right? So this is not a new phenomenon or concept, but this is definitely a place where as practitioners, where we can, insert ourselves and insert our protocols and recommendations to help, start to shift and change how people's systems are functioning. Some of the things that help stimulate vagal nerve activity, humming, right? It's so simple, right? A lot of times people are like, don't give me another thing to do, right? Don't give me any more, don't tell me to meditate, don't tell me to do breathing exercises. But like, how easy is it to hum? Hum when you're in the shower, hum when you're in the car. You can do that while you're doing the dishes. Very, very basic things that can get things going. But we want to interrupt this cycle in a big way. Because what we do tend to see is that once it gets going and it's left unchecked and uncontrolled, then we start to see the problems manifesting in different systems. So it might start as some stress that hits body inflammation, brain inflammation. Okay, now we've got dysbiosis. Now we've opened the door into a whole other, realm of issues, because as we know, our gut and the microbiome in our gut, well, they play a big role in the production of our neurotransmitters. So now the brain, mind symptoms that we were having because of inflammation are now being aggravated because we've lost our microbiome, our beneficial microbiome, and we're seeing that, just perpetuate. overwhelming, helpful, how do we feel? Thumbs up?
Oh, good, that's right.
I feel like sometimes I feel back, so I'm like, sometimes I listen to Dr. Yannick's webinars and I would like start and stop and do this like day in, day out. And then sometimes I'm worried, like, am I just dumping it all? This is the other piece that I don't think I really appreciated about cortisol until the last couple of years, because we always hear about high cortisol and inflammation, right? And we kind of know that those two pictures typically go very hand in hand. And I think that somewhere along the line, I lost appreciation for the fact that cortisol is actually, it's the anti-inflammatory, element of our body. And it's more about the correlation. And we're going to break that down here for a second, because when we have sympathetic activity, that fight or flight response, that sets off a whole cascade through the body. And if we look up here on the diagram, you see that sympathetic activity is giving the green light to something called NF-kappa B. NF-kappa B is hugely inflammatory. So that is what drives a lot of inflammation in the body in response to stress. Cortisol production is actually a check and balance, because our body is so intelligent, right? Like, it's unbelievably intelligent, and it has all of these built-in mechanisms to establish and maintain balance. And so while on one hand, it's driving inflammation, which, if we think back to what we talked about the idea of stress, is our body saying we have an inherent threat to our survival. So we need to start mobilizing the things that are going to help perpetuate our survival. So sometimes we think about stress, we think about some of the cardiovascular issues and fallout, can be high cholesterol, increased clotting. Your body is anticipating it's going to get impaled, that you're going to either fight someone, you need to flee. Like, so all of the things it's doing is really to drive survival in a threatened state where fighting or fleeing is going to be helpful, right? But unfortunately for us, our stress is triggered by, finances, or, job stress or traffic, things where we don't need this kind of response anymore, but it happens chronically. And this is what gets us into trouble. And the cortisol part, what's happening there is that over time, if we're chronically stressed and we're chronically asking our adrenals to pump out cortisol to help cool off the activity of this NF-kappa B and to help maintain and keep it in check. Well, over time, one, the tissues start to be less sensitive to the cortisol. Exact same mirrored picture as with diabetes and insulin resistance. The pancreas pumping out insulin, the tissues start to go like, whoa, enough insulin, like we start to be insulin resistant. Exact same picture happens with cortisol. And so very similarly, we see our adrenals respond the way that our pancreas does, like, okay, we need more cortisol. So they're pumping out more cortisol. And then at some point, the adrenals start to get tapped out. They go like, I can't keep this up forever. And so now you start to see that part of where we go from the wired and tired into starting to get into the adrenal more collapse, where there's that chronic fatigue element, because we just aren't getting the cortisol levels. We're not being able to sustain them, right? Because cortisol is also, it's our wakefulness hormone, right? We're supposed to see that big surge in the morning to wake us up, get us going. So this is a big part of when we look at that inflammatory picture, and why with inflammation in the context of chronic stress, we want to think about nurturing the adrenals as well as really nurturing the central nervous system and the stopping the stress, right? We've got to interrupt the stress so we stop that sympathetic signaling, but then also help to nurture our adrenal glands to get them back online so that we can help to cool off the inflammation that's kind of like the runaway train. Now, one of the favorite for this kind of a picture is the Ribes diagram, and it's a part of the case that I'm going to talk about later. I know that probably herbs, I don't think it's a big part of the curriculum. Is it the GEMOs, the phytotherapies? Because I know we didn't get them at all at CCNM. When I went through CCNM, they were the GEMO and phytogen had been stripped from the curriculum. So it was, yeah.
Added a slide about them during our asthma conversation.
Yeah, I love it. So you guys are ahead of what even the ND students are getting. It's amazing. It's really sad to me because when I look at the phytoembryotherapy, these are like the most holistic, kind of beautiful tools when it comes to the herbals that we have, because they're using the bud and the rootlets. So it's the embryo. I'm such a nerd. I hate goosebumps. So it's actually the embryonic piece of the plant. So when the plants mature, if we're looking at the leaves, the roots, the flowers, there's a whole host of different growth and hormones, and the meristem cells, which are basically the equivalent to our stem cells, those are all gone once you get to the mature parts of the plant. So there's still lots of benefits from different botanicals, but these guys have such a wide scope of action because they contain the whole potential in the stem cells of the plant and a whole bunch of the different growth cells. So the gemmos and phytogens are phenomenal, especially when you're trying to really touch a lot of systems and you don't want to overwhelm someone with too many things. And if we look at, whoops. Oh, yeah, I just lost, hold on. All right, guys, can you stop here? Go to. It said sharing stop. I think it's back to sharing now. There you go. This is what I'm talking about from a standpoint of like, look how many systems this touches. So when I tend to think of ribes, the first thing I think about is adrenal. Like it's such a core adrenal nurturing kind of stimulating substance. But part of by doing that, and if we now appreciate the role of adrenals from an immune and anti-inflammatory perspective, then we can appreciate why it's not just such an energy revitalizer, but it helps to with that maintenance of healthy cytokine activity. So all of that, when we say cytokine activity, healthy cytokine, it's helping to maintain and optimize the levels of inflammation. And so it's really going to help to cool down and reset the immune activity. And this is a big part of why we see there's a benefit to the musculoskeletal system, because typically the musculoskeletal system takes a major hit when we have chronic inflammation. So as does metabolic health. So if I would say to summarize this, in appreciate in its essence, and also to come back to our key topic of allergies today, ribes is a great it's a great one to apply when people have allergies. Like it's one of those things I gave my husband. My husband is not the most naturopathic person and only takes whatever I basically put in front of him. And I remember I gave him ribes and Sabadilla as a homeopathic one time because he was just sneezing. And he's like, oh my gosh, that's the first time you've ever given me something that works like as fast or faster than like a reactive basically. And so it's a really great from an allergy perspective as well. So talking about the systems, understanding the systems, but it's a great go-to to incorporate into an allergy protocol or for a protocol for someone who's suffering from allergies. And this is what we're talking about, not only from the form, but also typically with UNDA and the Genestra phytogens, they're biodynamically farmed. So the farming and the practices, like I was talking about this Th2, Th1 imbalance, a lot of it comes from pesticide exposure. One of the benefits that you can convey to your when you're in your practice and rating protocol and maybe saying, why do you want to pay for professional grade products? One is because they test every batch for pesticide residues, right? So when you're buying Genestra, Pure Encapsulation, Douglas, every single batch gets tested for all kinds of things, but including those pesticides residues. And then when you look at the UNDA and the phytogen, the way that they're farmed, it's actually, it's next level. It's not just regenerative to our health, but also to the earth. And I would say it can't be healthier than the plants. So I think that counts for a lot in my books. Moving to the gut, and we look at the gut, and I do love the quote, all disease begins in the gut. Again, I think that so much, I think you can even back it up. If I had to rewrite the quote, it would probably be for me, the nervous system. So I think a lot of what goes off in our gut is as a result of stress. But specifically with respect to allergies and elevated histamine, where we see very, very direct connections is when we have a dysbiotic gut. Some of the toxins that they produce, specifically like LPS, can actually be a trigger for mast cell degranulation and dumping of histamines. So having a dysbiotic gut is going to make your mast cells more unstable. So when we think about all the things we're trying to do, like, vitamin C, quercetin, ribes that are trying to stabilize and rebalance, we're fighting an uphill battle if we have a microbiome that is off and dysfunctional and producing those toxins that are going to make ourselves more reactive. It's also, a big part, the beneficial bacteria have an amazing influence on our immune system's ability to generate tolerance, right? So when we think about tolerance in the gut, I think about two things. One, we need to have an intact gut lining. If we have leaky gut, that right away is going to make us way more reactive because we're going to have molecules that are not fully broken down, getting in, and that is a massive cause of inflammation. But just in general, if we think about what's the state of our immune system, how reactive is it? How tolerant is it? It's like someone being, super like on guard and trigger happy. Like I always kind of think about the gut lining and I always visualize like a castle, right? Like one of those medieval movies where you've got the guys that are like standing like on guard on the watch kind of on the top towers. And if they're cool, calm, and relaxed because you're living in a peaceful time, there's not really a threat, they're kind of just there just in case. It's more of a bigger, they're not reactive. However, if you're suspecting a threat, if you're geared up, well, you're super alert and super vigilant. Well, all of a sudden, this is where you see someone coming and approaching the moat or the castle, and they're like, oh, there's a threat. And now we're shooting arrows, and oh, shoot, that was Johnny. I forgot he just went out to go, bring back the whatever, lost sheep or something. Oops, friendly fire. That's what happens in our gut, right? So when we have that hypervigilant state, our immune system, it fluxes from being totally relaxed, chill out, not really paying attention, scrolling on Instagram to way too hypervigilant. And now we've made an inappropriate reaction and mistake. And when we make those mistakes, unfortunately, because our immune system is really smart, we tend to remember them, right? And then we repeat that inappropriate mistake, whether it's in the form of an allergy to pollen or it's an inappropriate food sensitivity like wheat, gluten, dairy. And again, wheat and gluten, we see so much because they are harder to break down molecules. So back to that stress piece, if we're stressed, our digestive capacity is not as robust. So we see less stomach acid, less enzyme production, less efficient breakdown of our foods, and then more of a propensity to potentially respond. The other thing, the good bacteria, when they attach, especially when we look at like human strains, this is why human strains are so important, because there's a species-specific attachment element. So Dr. Nigel Plummer, who created HMF, he actually started his career in with animal agricultural. And what they found was that when they took bacteria from a really healthy cow and gave it to an unhealthy cow, they saw really great benefits. If they took that healthy bacteria and gave it to an unhealthy pig, there was some benefits, but not nearly the same as cow to cow. Same thing when they did pig to pig. From a healthy pig to an unhealthy pig, amazing benefits. Take that great bacteria from the healthy pig, give it to an unhealthy cow, mediocre. So when he came to develop probiotics for humans, he said it was no question it was going to be human strain. And a lot of it, again, has to do with the attachment ability. And part of the attachment, not only once they attach, they can propagate and colonize, not forever, but they can propagate themselves. So 10 billion can quickly become 100 billion. But that sticky substance that is what they use to attach to the cell, that permeates into the gut lining and actually is one of the mechanisms by which helping to communicate and promote tolerance. So changing the cytokine activity, changing that messaging to again promote more tolerance to what's coming through the gut. And so this is just to say, again, why it's so important to correct that dysbiosis is because if we don't, that dysbiosis also can be the key driver or also just a perpetuator. last thing I want to say on the importance of gut bacteria. It's always important from across our lifespan. However, we do have a 6-month window that is like no other, and that's the first 6 months of life. And so in the first 6 months of life, we know whatever gets laid down from a microbiome perspective is really going to anchor and perpetuate. So from my perspective, even if there's the most picture perfect microbiome, you know, and the baby goes through this perfect vaginal birth canal that is populated with the healthiest bacteria in the world, and they breastfeed, and mom's bacteria in her gut is awesome, which those are a lot of ifs, knowing our, you know, current society. But if they had the picture perfect, I would still want that baby to be on a probiotic for some interstitial of its first 6 months of life, because if we lay down some good bacteria, if they then, you know, have to go on an antibiotic down the road, if, you know, just they have gut stuff, we can then put those same strains back in and they'll permanently recolonize. So we can be really efficient with our supplementation. Then we don't need as much peppering down the road. They'll have that laid down and way more robust. So that's my 2 cents. And if we were to choose, because not all probiotics are created equal, especially in the context of allergies, I would be looking at this particular combination of 4 strains, because the research that was done with 454 pregnant women, they split them up, and what they found was that the ones who got the placebo versus the ones who got this cohort, 10 billion CFU of this exact combination, the ones who got the probiotics for their last in the last trimester of their pregnancy, and babies got it from day 1 through 6 months of life, those babies had a 57% decrease in the development of atopic eczema and a 44% decrease to common allergens. So looking at eggs, breast, milk, pollen, with skin testing. What was even more impressive is that they stopped at 6 months and they retested at 2 years, and they saw that the babies who got the 6 months of probiotics still had significantly reduced rate of both the eczema and allergy development. So that 6 months is really, really huge to capitalize on. And so those probiotics that we were talking about, those 4 core strains, you can find those in the HMF maternity as well as the HMF baby B and baby F. Does anyone know what baby B and baby F stand for? The B and F?
One is for breastfed and
Yeah.
then,
I was gonna, exactly, I was gonna say, no answers for you. No, but exactly, you guys know, so breastfed for B and formula fed for the F. And the only difference there is that the formula fed ones, it comes in a bigger box because it has more prebiotics. The baby B has a little bit, the baby F has a lot, because formula fed babies are just not going to get the same amount of prebiotics and oligosaccharides that are naturally in the breast milk. Now, they are galacto-oligosaccharides, which means that they're sourced from dairy because they're trying to mirror as much as possible what's in the natural breast milk. So if a parent is really adamant that they want to avoid all sources of dairy, they can easily just take the HMF maternity and open the capsule and give the baby that, because there's no prebiotics in that. So it's a dairy-free option. Or also if it's a vegan, if there's vegan preferences from that perspective as well. And so one thing to note here, do you guys notice the dosing? Yeah, exact same, right? So probiotics are the only time that we don't change dosing based on age or weight, right? So if you look at there, mom was getting 10 billion, baby is 2 seconds old, 10 billion, right? So it's literally same. And I would say that having, you know, prescribed for infants, when infants have colic, you know, digestive stuff, my first recommendation is just double the probiotic dose, the same way we would with an adult that has IBS. 10 billion is a great dose for an adult if we're just maintaining health, being optimal. If you look at our IBS formulas, they're like 25 billion, right? So it's the only time we don't change the dosing factor. Okay, so we're gonna wrap with the case study. So this is actually a loved one of mine who generously consented and donated her photos and story for science, we'll say. And so this is a picture of her in the hospital after going on a run. And so it's an interesting allergy because this is an allergy to exercise. It showed up, this it literally happened several times where she would have exertion on activity and go into anaphylaxis and actually have to go and be administered Benadryl and EpiPens and the whole 9 yards. Happened at the same time. She never had any food allergies, started to be anaphylactic to nuts. So right again at the same time. So what's going on? And I've actually, there's a number of cases that I've seen in individuals that same this exercise piece. Any ideas? Anything jumping to mind?
Adrenals are.
Yeah.
Totally. Adrenals are fried, tapped out, right? We think about the cortisol piece, that anti-inflammatory. When we exercise, that is going to initiate inflammation. And back to the IL-6, there's an IL-6 component to that. It's also why we see with post-COVID patients that are struggling, a lot of exercise intolerance sometimes. And so exercise, again, really good for us, but also inflammatory. And if we have tapped out shot adrenals and we don't have the mechanism to have that counterbalance, this is where we can see worst case scenario. So because I refuse to treat family, I send them all to one of my best friends, Dr. Kimberly Rambrand, who Rebecca knows is a medical advisor also with us at Atrium. She's brilliant. So she's goes to see Kimberly, the patient. So, oops, where's my, there we go. This is a core component of the protocol she gave my cousin. And we look at that, you know, one, I want you right off the bat to look at when we talked about adrenals and nervous system. So I'll go back for a second because we haven't talked about this pure tranquility, but this is within it. So it's GABA and L-theanine and glycine. So all really fast acting, right? So this is going to give a very fast acting within an hour. Typically, we see the shift. So there's a ton of research around suntheanine specifically as helping to shift brain waves and get into that alpha mode. So it's calming without being sedative. Now, sometimes people can take things that are calming, whether it's herbs or nutraceuticals they're calming, not sedative, and still feel tired. And part of that is you're just taking down the stress level, right? And so if you think about when we drink coffee and we promote our adrenaline, all these things, we're not feeling how tired we are. So if we take down those stress chemistry, sometimes all of a sudden we're like, oh, I'm exhausted. It's not that it's sedative, you're just feeling how tired you actually are. So just as an FYI, if a client ever comes back and they're like, you lied, you told me that was not sedative. It's like, well, honey, you're just that tired. The feeling. So really, again, a nice, fast acting relief. There's not always things that can give us like a more immediate relief. So this is really going to help someone in the moment. So that's the nervous system component. The ribes is the adrenals, right? The adrenals and the anti-inflammatory aspect that we talked about. And so really, there's a lot of adrenal formulas out there that we can go after. One of the reasons why ribes is always top of my mind is because of that really, really broad spectrum approach, because of the buds, right? Because it's fundamentally different than some of the other herbal formulas that you might see. Now, this is actually a little bit of a spin on the protocol that she got. I'm going to show you in a second. The protocol that, oh, there you go. Deleted something. It was the protocol that she got had the digestive in it. And I don't know why it's not popping up. It's pardon that, but she's a student, right? So having to be mindful of dollars. She's also not the best at compliance and taking things. And so Dr. Kimberly gave her the HMF digestive because it has the probiotic and the enzyme both like together, comboed in the one pill. So it was just okay, this is a little bit more of a practical application in this, in this case, both from a dollars perspective and compliance. However, this would be, in my mind, a little bit of your more ideal probiotic, and the reason being, because in the digestive enzyme ultra, you're not just getting broad spectrum for, your carbohydrates, plant-based, fat-based and protein foods. You got all of those enzymes. You've also got the betaine hydrochloride. So we think about stress, stomach acid.
I think you accidentally turned off.
Oh, I turned on the camera. I did do that. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, there. So I'm still sharing though, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So the betaine hydrochloride is basically not just actually replacing the stomach acid so that you've got both the breakdown of foods, but also the sterilization. So on that dysbiosis thing, helping to sterilize, because we see lots of stomach acid, we open the door to SIBO, right? From multiple perspectives. But it also will help to re-regulate the body's ability to make its own stomach acid. So it's not just like a straight HCl, it's going to help to regenerate. So that's why this would be my go-to, because the digestive doesn't have the betaine hydrochloride. So it's got the full perspective of the enzymes, but not the betaine hydrochloride. So in a perfect world, this would be the option. And I also like coupled with the HMF neuro capsules or powder, because back to the discussion around wheat and dairy being hard to break down units, the extra strain that we have in here, this lactobacillus rhamnosus, that specific col63, that specific strain of rhamnosus has been shown to help break down undigested wheat and dairy proteins. So sometimes when people have undigested wheat and dairy proteins, they actually have an opiate-like effect in the brain. So if you talk to anybody who's just like, oh my gosh, after I have a pizza or a bowl of pasta, any kind of meat, dairy rich meal, I just feel exhausted or I have like tremendous brain fog, that can be a component of what's going on. And so this is a great product, and the neuro is a nod to the brain. And what it was initially designed and formulated for was for children who have ADHD or teens or adults, but also autism, because we see a huge correlation with food sensitivities, and again, wheat and dairy being high up there, and it can be really hard to have maximal avoidance. And so this helps to then mitigate from that perspective. And I just throw this chart in here because it's important with all of the different HMF. Just when you look, there is another neuro product, and that's the neurocognition. But that's a totally different product with a totally different purpose, more from the bacopa and the antioxidants. So that's more about speeding up the rate of the neurons firing. So kind of two different brain gut products, but one is about the digestion of the wheat and dairy, and one is about speeding up, hence the race car, that like fast component. So.
One time the HMF neuro, you would use it in cases of office.
So a lot of times, yeah. So a lot of times, what it was initially designed and marketed for was for individuals that have ADD, ADHD, or autism, because we know that with those conditions, there is a higher proportion typically of not only just gut dysbiosis, but also food sensitivities. So, and wheat and dairy are high on the list. Yeah. And a lot of the parents that I've talked to have actually said they really do see like a shift in behavioral and symptoms being on the probiotics. Yeah. And not just the neuro. I was at it doing a dinner and learn out in Belleville not too long ago. And one of the individuals who was there was actually saying her son has autism, and she said being on the HMF neurocognition has been a game changer. So either of these could be, great. Again, they're just coming from two different perspectives.
How would you determine whether you wanted the FOS or not, the FOS?
Great question. So how do we determine if we want the FOS or not? I typically will start on, I will typically start on a no FOS product, just because it can be aggravating. So it's an amazing way for supporting the growth of the bacteria. We're going to put this on the other side. It's an amazing way to support the growth. However, it can sometimes aggravate. I usually go with something that is low or no. So you could absolutely start with the capsules as a starting point and then graduate to the powder. It's not a huge amount, so it shouldn't be too aggravating, but I would maybe just, if you thought someone was potentially very sensitive, start with a capsule and then go. Any other questions, guys? This was just talking about the importance of vagal nerve stimulation.
We have a, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, so one question here. Is, would the approach for food sensitivities in kids be the same? Their daughter is 4 years old. She started to have food sensitivity to banana when she was 10 months. And it's slowly been increasing, now getting rashes around the mouth, headaches, sneezing, stomach pain, and it's now to banana, avocado, apple, pineapple, cantaloupe, and
Yeah.
but berries.
Yeah, and so that can happen too, because a lot of times there's grouping, so I know with banana, like avocado. And then a couple other things that you listed off are in the same kind of like similar grouping.
Tropical foods.
It's funny, it's not even that they're tropical, because my husband's anaphylactic to banana. And he actually doesn't like avocado and peaches. I'm like, oh my God, I could eat guac for days. I'm like, you're the only person. And it was funny because I was like, you're the only person, like, who doesn't like peaches? Like, who doesn't like, and when I was looking at, subgroups of like antigens, they actually are all in the same one, along with tomatoes and a couple of other things. I think even celery. So that can happen. And I would say fundamentally, yes. The short answer is yes. Same approach for food sensitivities in a child. Oh, God. Same approach for food sensitivities in a child. You can do the same blood test to look, and identify if they want to see like, okay, what's the width. But again, we want to come back to what's the underlying, issues. So looking at definitely the microbiome, but also that T cell polarization, because one of the things that will drive a predisposition to making food sensitivities will be, that imbalance and a shift towards the Th2 dominance. Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you.
Question?
But the virus migrant,
Mm-hmm.
one, would you be able to go back to that slide?
Sure, yeah.
Two things in there I wanted to see at the bottom, I didn't read. And then also, when you're recommending that for adrenal support, would you still consider adding something else like the adrenal formula? It's completely unnecessary.
You could. So, but one more. This one.
Yeah.
So you certainly could. You can absolutely like double down. I think it always, in my mind, depends on the individual, of course. But I would look at, before I did 2 adrenal things, I would look at something to make sure that we're supporting the nervous system to try to calm and stem and reduce that sympathetic firing. So my first thought would be, okay, the ribes, and then what are we doing to really tackle the nervous system overactivity? And, maybe again, depending on the individual, if there was a real depleted perspective, one of the things I would think about that I love is the TADs, right? Where it's like the actual glandulars. And that is a phenomenal product for when people are really deficient. And you could have the TADs or the TADs Plus that then has some of the vitamins and nutrients. And you could certainly double down. I think that's something that would be very like synergistic, especially in a depleted state.
So
However, I was going to say, I think my first inclination is typically to go like with what we call like horizontal expansion, kind of thinking around, are we supporting the other system? So I'd like to first see like, okay, do we have something for the nervous system? Do we have them on a good probiotic? And maybe, there's a fish oil in there, or maybe, there's something else that's anti-inflammatory, the inflammation side. Again, it's really going to just depend person to person. And Biotone EFA from Genestra is another adrenal product that is not, it doesn't present as an adrenal product. And so when that's one that comes to mind along with the TADs from a perspective of it does hit the adrenals, but from a different perspective in that it's providing fatty acids in a very bioavailable form. They're actually pre-digested, so they're emulsified. And one of the things when we look at adrenal glands is like the actual health of the adrenal gland, but then also are they getting the raw materials that they need? And sometimes the liver can be congested. And so the liver could be sluggish. So you're not actually getting those raw materials to build the cortisol and the other adrenal hormones in a robust way. So the biotone EFA can be a great adrenal support, even though it's not quite like it's not marketed as an adrenal support. It's a great one to layer on, like with something like the Ribes potentially.
So when you were talking about supporting nervous system, were you talking about things like GABA, like L-theanine, that type
Yeah,
of stuff?
exactly. So like in that case, the case study there, the pure tranquility, that's the nervous system support. That's going to really help to take down the sympathetic tone. And in her case, just as a little bit of the aside, the reason that went so heavy on the gut part is because a lot of times when she gets anxious, she actually feels like she can't eat. She sometimes gets nauseous, throws up. So there's a huge kind of gut component element. So it's going to change with every individual and kind of looking at like, what's the main, presenting, symptoms. Yeah. Yeah.
And hers can be taken long term.
Of course, they've been taking long term. Yeah, I don't see why not. I have not seen any reason why not to. I would always kind of come back to, like, are we correcting the root cause? Right? I tend to think of like a lot of the nutraceuticals, like if we can get like really to root cause, then we hopefully don't need to rely on something long term, but there's not a downside, like it damaging. There's no, from that perspective. I am a big believer though in kind of giving the body little breaks, even if it's like, just to cycle to do a week or two, or then if you're using the quercetin from an allergy perspective, maybe go at it from a different way for a bit and then come back to it. I think with some pulsing, we tend to get better responses from the body. It's like even with like a workout, right? Like if you do the same thing all the time. My husband's been at the gym every day for the last year, and he was like so proud of himself. And then he watched this golf video app thing. He's like, oh, I'm going to change our workout. He came home the next day, like crippled. Like, I was like, because you're doing the same thing, right? Like your body, you reach this plateau. When you switch it up, then you maximize the benefit. So I think it's the same, in my opinion, with the nutraceuticals. Yeah. Great questions, guys. Yeah.
Is this like the line of the under drops that my former naturopath used to use on me years ago? Is this the under line? Just
Yeah.
general-
Yeah. So like you're talking about the under numbers?
Yeah, the numbers.
Yeah,
Is it
it's the same unda. Yep, same unda. It's just a different. So the unda numbers are very intense and complicated and really hard to use, right? In this, they're amazing. You have to, there's a significant learning curve on them. Let's just say, because even if you've got somebody who maybe is presenting with a thyroid issue, you can't necessarily just give like thyroid numbers, because if it's nervous system driving it versus immune, like you have to really get to the core. However, they have unduplexes and they have these undogemos, which are awesome and really a lot less of a learning curve. Like I hope that you guys could leave today and feel like, okay, I could give Ribes to somebody. Like I know how to, what that picture looks like. But yeah, they're the exact same company.
Same company, but not same, like the under drops.
The under drops are prepared differently. Yeah, so they're prepared, they're more of a homeopathic.
Right.
And whereas this is, the way that these are prepared is they take the buds and they macerate them and have both glycerin and alcohol. And so there's those extracts, and then they dilute them with water after. So there is some succussion and dilution, but the under numbers are much more straight, like homeopathic.
So we wouldn't use these in combination, like the under drops tend to work better in like 2 or 3 or 4.
Exactly. You could just take this on its own. You could couple it with a probiotic. You don't need the under numbers.
Okay.
Yeah, great question.
I just have a question. So the Ribes nigrum, that's the Latin name.
Yeah.
Is there a common name? for that?
Blackcurrant.
Oh,
Yeah,
blackcurrant.
yeah, good
And
question.
then is that some product that is under the Atrium umbrella now?
So this is, the undas are under the Atrium umbrella. Yeah, they were actually core with Genestra. So Genestra and unda were like our core initial when it was just the Royal. And then we've gotten Pure and Douglas and Sisu. So these are kind of like the OGs of
Is there any concerns about this product being potentially stimulating for someone who does have adrenal fatigue, but shows as maybe a hyperarousal?
Yeah, great question. So I hopefully I think they can probably hear, right? You're close to the mic, so I won't repeat it. But yeah, I think always we do want to think about that. So if someone was really, especially really deficient and in that totally exhausted stage, I would probably start with something more like the TADS and like the biotone, where there's not going to be like that stimulated effect, because even when I'm thinking about one of the most extreme cases of adrenal fatigue ever treated, and we used the chelidonium plex. I think it was the chelidonium plex or the unda, because we used to have the drainage kits. So it was a little bit of like unda, like the number of the plexus, but then it was just biotone and HMF intensive. And it was unbelievable because she was so deficient. And that the biotone, like I love the biotone from an adrenal perspective, really got her like kind of coming out of her shell. And it's funny because not overstimulated in that way, but one of the things I just wanted to touch on is you always want to be careful in counseling people that as soon as they feel better, they often go out and just expel that energy. And so you want to really caution people that as you're getting those energy stores back, you want to retain them, right? Because I remember talking to someone who was on TADS for like 6 months, or maybe it was more than that. She said she'd been on for like 2 years or something. And I was like, oh God, I was like, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, you're fine. Like, you're not going to harm anything, but you got to get to the root cause. Oh, every time I stop taking it, I'm just exhausted. It's like, oh, well, maybe you gotta replenish the store. So that's always another thing I think about. So good question. Think about the sensitivity, the hyperarousal. It's all potentially concerned, again, less so than maybe some other things, but yeah, if it's really, really, you sense that deficiency and that emptiness, then it would go something like the TADS.
And dosing?
Dosing, so with these typically, you're gonna get a spoon in there, so you can use the little spoon. It's typically about 50-60 drops if you want to put them in water. And then for children, if you want to, dose differently, just think by weight. So think 50-60 drops is for an adult, kind of 150 pounds. So if the child's 50 pounds, you could just cut it in a third.
And just some.
I'm not super tied to that. I think that, I often will do, if I'm doing remedies like this, I'll often do them first thing in the morning. You don't want to do Ribees too late at night or in the day, because it can have that stimulating effect in a positive way, but you don't want to have it too like before bed. One of my homeopathic professors talked about this idea that we're too sensitive on like, oh, don't take a homeopathic or energetic before you brush your teeth or after you eat. And her whole thought was just like, I've never really seen it really disrupt things. She's like, I think actually it just makes compliance poor, and then people psych themselves out and things not working. So I've never been too fussy about that. Yeah. Especially that I think if anything, I think, you can put it in some water and even just like, if you were to just sip it slowly, hold in the mouth for a little bit, I think that's going to maybe have a little added benefit, but it would be usually twice. Yeah. You guys are awesome. Oh my God. Great questions. So engaged. Oh, sure. Yeah.
Going back to the berberine immune support slide, what was the website you mentioned?
Oh, cogensimmunology.com. And it should, I think, be on this document somewhere.
Yeah, it is.
Did you see it? Page 12. Thank you. Page 12. And so we can make sure we send this out to everybody. But yeah, it's an amazing, amazing resource, guys.
And would the HMF neuro be helpful for adults with ADHD too? And if so, in what therapeutic dose?
The
HMF.
HMF neuro, the capsules, and let's go back for a second. I'm assuming they're thinking the capsules we talked about. So again, dosing wise, it's not going to change really from adult to child. So you want back there. Maybe you just clarify here. I think they're asking about the capsule or powder, I'm guessing. As I mentioned, that was the one that was originally designed. However, I've heard great anecdotal feedback for both. And the neuro capsule and powder, usually you're going to do 1 capsule twice a day or 1 scoop twice a day. And part of the benefit to that is that each one's got about 12 billion. Those 4 core strains are the same strains that we see in our HMF IBS relief, and that have great clinical research for helping to resolve leaky gut as well. So there's a lot of benefit at that 25 billion dosing, which is where 1 twice a day would get you. Similarly, actually with the neurocognition, on the other side, is that that also is the exact same 4 core strains. So the only main difference there is that the capsules have that rhamnosus that breaks down the wheat and dairy. So if you suspect that it's more, there's some food triggering, then I would go with those neuro. If you suspect it's more inflammation and you want the Bacopa for the speed, the increased speed, that's a great way to go as well. And back to the idea of cycling, you know, one thing I would advise is there's nothing like just giving a kind of maybe like a 3 to 6 month cycle with one and then flip to the other and just see what the kind of proof is in the pudding, so to speak, with how the symptoms and that particular individual is. And you could always also go back and forth.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And should the allergy remedies, specifically vitamin C and quercetin, be taken throughout the whole allergy season or only when symptoms are present?
Great question. So ideal would be to start before symptoms are present. So this is where if someone knows that they're, you know, susceptible to allergies, a lot of times they know that like they've got a window, like some people it's the beginning, some people it's in August. You definitely want to start before your symptoms appear because it's much easier to stabilize those mast cells ahead of time. Once they start to degranulate, now you're in a cycle. So particularly if you're a spring person, I would say, you know, pump your vitamin C throughout the winter because it's going to help you on that immune infection side. And then you can always layer in the quercetin kind of starting March before the pollen's out. That would be optimal. And then carry through till you're done. And then you can always take a break if you're, you know, until you get closer to that lead up.
Perfect.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, guys. We were online. And you guys are so amazing. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you everyone online that attended as well. And of course, everyone that's here in person. And thank you, Dr. Jacqueline, for coming today. And Rebecca here supporting as well. So I think we're going to end the webinar now and then in person here. We'll give out the gift packages and take some photos.
Even Dr. Jax would just like to go to the last slide and
Yeah.
we can all scan the box.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and another. You know what? It's not there. That is my bad. This is what happens when I put together a presentation and not Rebecca. But what we'll do in the recording that we send out in the resources, we'll have the QR code in the links that take you to our, if you are interested to sign up for our monthly newsletter, every Tuesday, Thursday, we always do webinars on different topics. They change all the time. And so that can be, yeah, and that'll be there as well. Yeah. And
And Rebecca wanted to.
you want to see if you read about the co-op?
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect, amazing. Hi, everybody. So now you know, hi guys. You know, this is such a nostalgic experience for me because not too long ago in 2019, I was sitting right there and I would love the guest speaker spot because I'll be not only because of the free samples, you know, like we are students, we love that, but it's so much of education, so much of knowledge. And trust me, this has helped me in my clinical practice. And it has helped me to work with Atrium Innovations as well. And coming to the point of a co-op, we all have co-op hours. So I don't know if you guys are still graduating, what is the whole process? Of course, please check with Julia and Theo, they are the main pillars for that. We at Atrium have a co-op program, especially designed for IHN students, because I know how valuable it is, and Dr. Jackson knows how valuable it is as being a student to have an insight into how supplement companies work. What do we do out there? Like, it's very easy to be a practitioner and go on calling our reps, account reps, and be like, hey, we want this, hey, we want that. But what do we do about it? You know, today we learned about this case study. You know, for a fact, when you go back, you have Sim 1, Sim 2, any of these classes, you're going to apply to them. You're going to apply to your own practice. And this is what happens when you're in co-op, you come by, work with us. Okay, so you will be working with Dr. Jax, who's a brilliant mind, as you can see. Okay, so we would be working all together very closely for our education program and helping to get more webinars done. We primarily work for retail food stores, and that's where we know from Healthy Planet. So we work for educating all the team members of different health food stores because they are actually brand ambassadors. So this is what you would be doing in co-op, and it's such an exciting phase. I think Julia is going to send it out a request. We have, I think probably in the month of July or August is when we're going to start the first rollout. So please apply. I think even if you have finished your core bars, right, Dr. Jax, they can apply.
Oh,
for
for
it?
sure. We're just
Yes.
excited to have engagement, and part of what we're hoping to give to you guys, whoever, comes to intern with us, is experience in the behind the scenes, also with the education production. I know so much with getting clients these days, you need to create content and, the getting yourself out there. And so I think one of the things I've benefited from at being at Atrium is there's some great systems and processes with the education. And so that'd be part of what people think to impart.
Yeah, so right now it's going to be primarily for the Toronto GTA area because it's an in-person co-op, but we are looking forward to expanding it. So I know this recording is going to be shown in Vancouver. So please, we're looking forward to expanding it in the fall. So look forward to that email, and I'm looking forward for a lot of applications because we would love to have fresh eyes into our team. So yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Picture? Yeah, I would love a picture. Can I ask you to take a picture? On my phone?